The rain was streaking sideways across the harbor view from the 20th floor when my managing director slid the partnership review folder back across her desk like it was a receipt for something I hadn't ordered. Outside, Auckland looked the way it always does in late August: silver, restless, indifferent. Inside, the air conditioning hummed at a temperature designed for men in suits, and I sat in a chair that was 3 centimeters too low, watching my career evaluation get dismissed in the time it takes to refill a coffee cup. "Look, Harriet," she said, taking off her reading glasses with that little sigh she reserves for difficult conversations. "I've been through your file thoroughly. Your work is solid, reliable. But partnership at Halloran Brennan isn't just about being competent, it's about presence, gravitas. The clients need to walk into a room and see someone they can imagine on a billboard, maybe in another year or two, once you've developed a bit more of that. Solid. Reliable." The 2 words landed on the polished Kari desk between us with the same dull thud as a closed file. 7 years. 7 years of being the first to arrive and the last to leave. 7 years of saving the Whitcomb acquisition when our actual senior partner was off somewhere in Queenstown, not answering his phone. 7 years of writing the briefs that other people walked into court with, but I only smiled and nodded. The way you do at a hairdresser who's already cut your fringe too short. "I appreciate the feedback, Margaret. Thank you for being so direct. That's the spirit." She was already glancing at her monitor, my disappointment filed under done with. "Oh, before you go, the Tairua Resort Consortium needs the revised heads of agreement by Thursday. I told them you'd have it sorted. You always do." I gathered my folder and walked past the corner office that had been quietly emptied 2 weeks earlier, the one with the harbor view I had assumed, with the kind of stupid hope that should embarrass adults, would have my name on the door. In the lift down to the car park, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel. The woman looking back at me wasn't crying. She wasn't even particularly angry. She had the expression of someone who'd just finished doing the maths in her head and didn't like the answer. I sat in my car in the cold concrete dimness of the basement and made 2 decisions before I turned the key in the ignition. I was going to cancel the long weekend in the Coromandel I'd been building toward for 14 months, and I was going to stop, effective immediately, doing every single thing that wasn't actually written into my employment contract. Nobody at Halloran Brennan knew it yet, but the quiet engine that had been keeping the firm running while everyone else took the bows was about to power down. Before I tell you what happened next, and the bit at the end of week 2, when I missed a call from the senior partner so many times, my voicemail box actually filled up. You might want to know what made a person who was raised to be useful finally decide that being useful was the trap. If any part of this sounds familiar, give the video a like and follow along. I share a news story every week from people who quietly realize their worth. Now, back to that rainy Tuesday. My name is Harriet Donnelly, and I'm 33 years old. I grew up in a small town just outside Tauranga, the eldest of 3 girls, with a mother who taught primary school for 31 years and a father who was a builder with a bad back and a good laugh. We weren't wealthy. We were the kind of family where if something broke, you fixed it before you complained about it, and where the highest compliment my mother could give a person was that they'd gone about their business without making a fuss. I absorbed that as gospel. I took it to law school in Wellington. I took it to the Auckland firm, where I'd worked since my 2nd year of postgraduate practice. I made it the entire architecture of my career, and for 33 years it had served me very well, except for the part where it had also served me up. I'm the daughter of a primary school teacher, so I'm naturally good at organizing things. I have one of those memories that holds onto procedural detail the way other people remember song lyrics. I'm methodical, patient, and I have an almost embarrassing tendency to solve problems before anyone has noticed there is one. When I was 9, I had already worked out the family's grocery budget. By the time I joined Halloran Brennan as a junior, I was the person the senior associates handed their messy files to when they didn't know where to start. I had also, 18 months earlier, become a single mother. My daughter Imogen had just turned 6 when her father moved back to Christchurch to be nearer his ailing mother, and somewhere in the year that followed, the conversation about him moving back never quite happened. He's a kind man. He sends maintenance on time. He's a weekend voice on speakerphone and a face at Christmas. The day-to-day raising of our small, quiet, observant child had become, by simple geography and unspoken agreement, mine. My mother had moved up from Tauranga the month after the separation, taken the upstairs of our small Mount Eden villa, and become Imogen's after-school world. Without her, none of what I was about to do would have been possible. With her, I had a fighting chance. When I joined the firm 7 years earlier, I'd walked into the leftovers of a quiet disaster. The senior associate who'd previously held my role had quit in dramatic fashion after a falling out with one of the founding partners, and she'd taken every scrap of institutional knowledge with her. There were no transition notes. There were passwords nobody had. There were client files in 3 different naming conventions and a critical spreadsheet that referred to 17 separate clients only as the Resort 1, the Resort 1, New, and Resort 3. I spent 4 months reverse engineering the chaos. I rebuilt every workflow. I created color-coded process guides, an indexed precedent library, and a master document for each of our top 15 clients that explained, in plain English, who they were, what they wanted, what they were sensitive about, and where every previous matter sat in our system. Margaret, my managing director, never bothered to learn the system. Why would she? She had me. "You're a natural," she would say in my reviews, with the gentle finality of someone closing a drawer. There would be a small pay rise that always stopped just short of what the role was actually worth, and the conversation would move on. 2 years ago, the firm had taken on the Tairua Resort Consortium, a $46 million coastal development with a tangle of iwi consultation, resource consent, and overseas investment compliance that had scared off 2 other firms before us. I had built that relationship from the very first awkward coffee in a Newmarket cafe where the consortium's chief executive, a sharp Northland woman named Ranjamari, had quizzed me for 40 minutes about my views on treaty principles. I had visited the site 6 times, including once on a wet Saturday with my own torch. I had learned the difference between 3 flavors of resource consent paperwork until I dreamed in green and orange bordered forms. Margaret had been to 2 meetings, both of them the kind where the photographer was scheduled. Each morning, I arrived at the office at 7:15. I prepared a 1-page brief for Margaret on every active matter, so that when she walked into her 9 o'clock partners meeting at 5 to 9, she could speak fluently about every file as if she'd been across them all night. I drafted her client emails. I previewed her phone calls. I caught her mistakes before clients saw them, including the time she called Ranjamari Rosemary in a pitch deck, and I changed it before send. I worked Sundays during big closings. I canceled 3 holidays in 5 years. I missed the entirety of my middle sister's pregnancy because I was, in the end, in the office. And I had told myself, because that is what people like me are taught to tell ourselves, that this was just the cost of being seen. The morning after Margaret told me I lacked gravitas, something in me went quiet in a new way. I arrived at the office at exactly 9. Not 7:15, not 8:45. 9 on the dot, with a flat white from the place across Custom Street, and a calm I hadn't felt in years. I did not draft Margaret a briefing. I answered the emails specifically addressed to me, and nothing else. When the office manager rang at 10 with a fire about a missing affidavit, I told her gently that affidavits weren't actually within my role, and she should ask the litigation paralegal. There was a small, surprised silence on the line. By 11, 3 different people had come past my desk with the same expression, that mild, slightly stunned look of someone who has tried a familiar door handle and found it locked. Peter, one of the senior associates who'd been at the firm 2 years longer than me and who outranked me in nothing except job title, leaned on the partition. "Hey, Harriet, did you see the email about the Whitcomb disclosure issue?" "I did, yes." I kept typing. He waited for the rest of the sentence. I let him. "So, can you have a look at it?" I lifted my eyes from the screen with the friendliest smile I had. "It's actually under your matter, Peter. It's flagged for your review. I'm sure you'll work it out." His mouth did a small, awkward thing. "But you usually—" "I've been told I need to focus on developing a stronger sense of my own role," I said pleasantly. "I'm trying to honor that feedback." At 5:05, I shut my laptop, put it in my bag, and went home. I hadn't left the office at 5:05 on a weekday in nearly 4 years. On the drive across the bridge, I rang the holiday park in Pauanui and canceled the cabin I'd booked back in May. The young man who took the call kept apologizing on my behalf, as if my own holiday were something I owed him. I told him no. No, it was the right thing. I'd be there in spirit, watching the show. That evening, I walked into my own kitchen at 5:20, and Imogen looked up from the bench where she was helping my mother shell peas, and her small face went through a tiny series of expressions: confusion, calculation, hope. "Mum, are you sick?" "No, sweetheart. I'm not sick." "Then why are you home?" I crouched down next to the bench, so we were eye to eye. She had her father's serious dark eyebrows and my mother's gray-blue eyes, and she was looking at me with the wary attention of a child who's learned not to assume good things last. "I decided," I said slowly, "that my time is more valuable than I've been letting people treat it, so I came home." She thought about this for a long moment. Then she said, "Can we make pikelets?" "Absolutely, we can make pikelets." My mother turned away from the peas and pretended to be very busy with the kettle, but I saw her shoulders drop a little, the way they do when she's been worried about something for a long time and has finally been given permission to stop. We made pikelets. They were uneven, and some of them caught, and Imogen flipped 2 onto the floor, and we ate them off her plastic placemat anyway. Around 7:15, my work phone began buzzing on the bench. I turned it face down and ignored it. Imogen watched me do it with an expression I'm still working out how to describe, something between disbelief and a small, fierce gladness. The next morning, the cracks were already showing. Margaret appeared at my desk at 10:20, 2 spots of color high on her cheekbones, holding a printout of an email I had not sent on her behalf the night before. "Where are the implementation notes for the Tairua consents?" "In the shared drive," I said evenly. "Under Tairua Resort Consortium, then implementation phase, then the master document. It's about 100,000, about 140 pages, but it's tabbed by milestone." I sent the link to the whole partner group in March. She stared at me as if I'd just suggested she perform open heart surgery using a YouTube tutorial. "There are dozens of files in there. The master document has a table of contents. Can you just handle this directly? Ranjamari is asking when we're filing the variation." "I'd be happy to," I said. "But I'm finalizing the Whitcomb disclosure for Peter today, and I've got the compliance review for the Law Society audit due tomorrow. If you'd like me to deprioritize the audit, that's your call to make." Her jaw tightened in a way I'd seen her use on opposing counsel. "This can't wait." "Then perhaps you might want to ask Peter to take the lead on Tairua. He's been copied on every email. He'll find his way." She walked away without answering, and the click of her heels on the polished concrete floor sounded harder than usual. That evening, I drove out to Cornwall Park with Imogen and her scooter, and we fed the lambs through the fence and watched the light go gold over the sheep paddocks while my work phone, set to silent, vibrated in the bottom of my bag like a trapped insect. When we got home, I checked it once. 42 missed calls. Voicemails ranging from confused to clipped to one from Margaret that began, "Harriet, I'm not sure what's gotten into you," and which I deleted without finishing. I slept better than I had in 3 years. By Thursday morning, the office had the atmosphere of a small kitchen during a power cut. People were moving in fast, useless circles. Margaret was visible through the glass of her office, clearly on a video call with someone who was not enjoying being on the call. Peter ambushed me at the photocopier, his eyes a little wild. "Harriet, where on earth have you been?" "At my desk, Peter. From 9 until 5. As contractually required. The Tairua Consortium is threatening to pull. They want an emergency meeting today. Margaret can't find half the documentation. Nobody understands the consent variation framework you set up." "That's troubling," I said, in the tone of someone hearing about a stranger's sad news. "It's all in the shared drive. The framework document is called Tairua Consent Variation Master Process. It walks through the whole logic. Nobody can read your documentation without you explaining it to them." I didn't answer that, because I didn't trust what I wanted to say to come out kindly. Margaret's PA appeared at my elbow before I had to. "Harriet, Margaret needs you in the boardroom." Now, I picked up a notebook and a pen, and walked at my own pace down the corridor, past the framed photographs of every white male partner the firm had ever had, into the boardroom that overlooked the White Mata. Margaret was there. So was Jeffrey Halloran himself, the founding partner, who at 68 still came in 2 days a week in beautifully cut suits and was the only person at the firm Margaret seemed actually afraid of. Jeffrey looked up as I came in, and his face was not stern. It was tired. Tired in the way of a man realizing, in real time, that something has gone wrong on his watch. "Harriet, please, sit down. We've got ourselves into a bit of a mess with Tairua, and we need your help to sort it out." I sat. I placed my notebook squarely in front of me. "Of course, Jeffrey. Tell me what's happened." Margaret was the one who answered, and the words were tight and rehearsed. "We need you to take ownership of the Tairua matter again. Effective immediately. With," and here she paused, as if the next words were a small bone caught in her throat, "with full credit and a corresponding adjustment to your compensation, and title, of course." I tilted my head a little. "I appreciate that, Margaret, but I should be transparent with you both. Yesterday afternoon, I had a long conversation with Haley Tan at Lockwood McAuliffe. They've offered me a senior associate role with a clear partnership pathway over 24 months and a starting package about 30% above what I currently earn. They believe, in their words, that I'm partnership material." The silence in the boardroom was its own weather. Jeffrey's eyes went very still. Margaret's hand, the one with the rose gold wedding ring, closed slowly on the edge of her folder. "You're leaving," Jeffrey said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a man reading the room. "I haven't accepted yet. I was taking the long weekend to think. The long weekend I canceled, in fact, to come in and stabilize things here. I haven't decided what I want to do." "Whatever Lockwood are offering," Margaret said. "Too quickly. We'll match. We'll exceed it. Name the figure." I let her sentence sit there for a moment, just so we could all hear it together. "Margaret," I said gently, "this isn't really about a figure. It's about being told, on Tuesday, that I lack the gravitas for partnership, and being asked, on Thursday, to single-handedly save the firm's largest matter. Both of those things can't be true. One of them is wrong." Jeffrey had the grace to close his eyes briefly. Margaret looked at the table. "Would you mind," Jeffrey said, "having a word with me in my office? Just the two of us." I followed him down the corridor. His office was at the far end of the floor, full of bound volumes and a slightly cracked leather couch, and the kind of view I had once, foolishly, imagined being mine. He gestured to the couch and sat across from me in an armchair, not behind his desk, and I noticed the gesture and what it meant. "Harriet," he said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd like an honest answer. How long has this been going on?" "How long has what been going on, Jeffrey?" "You doing the work, and Margaret taking the credit." I considered lying, briefly, out of muscle memory. Instead, I said, 7 years. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers and said, "I owe you an apology. I've been semi-retired for 5 of those years. I trusted my managing director to tell me the truth about who was carrying which weight. That was a mistake, and it's mine." "Thank you," I said. And I meant it, because no senior man had ever apologized to me at work in my life. "I'm not going to insult you by trying to outbid Lockwood on salary alone," he went on. "But I'd like to propose something else. I'm going to create a new role, Director of Practice and Client Strategy. You'd report directly to me. You'd have authority over the operational architecture of the firm, the systems, the precedent library, the client management, all of it, and you'd sit on the partnership track with a clear 2-year window. The compensation will be at partner equivalent level from day one, and you'd have hiring authority for 2 associates of your own choosing. That's a generous offer." "It's not generous. It's overdue." I said nothing for a while. Outside his window, a container ship was nosing slowly into the port. "Jeffrey, may I be honest? Please." Part of me wants to take Lockwood's offer, because 7 years is a long time to be invisible, and there's a real freshness to the idea of walking into a building where nobody has ever underestimated me. And part of me wants to take yours, because what I've built here matters to me, and I don't actually want to start over. And there's a third thing I want to say, which is harder. Go on. I don't want my decision to result in Margaret being pushed out. I'm not saying that because I'm noble. I'm saying it because I've watched her for 7 years, And I've come to understand that she is exactly the person this firm rewarded her for being. Replacing her doesn't fix what's actually broken. What's broken is that there's no system in this firm for noticing the people who do the quiet work. And if I take your offer, and the first thing that happens is that my old boss gets demoted, everyone here will learn the wrong lesson from it. Jeffrey looked at me for a long, level moment. What's the right lesson? That the firm is going to start seeing the people who've been doing the work. Margaret can stay in her role. She's good at clients. She just shouldn't be the bottleneck for promotions in operational areas she doesn't understand. That should sit with me. He nodded, slowly. Take the long weekend. The one you canceled. Take it. Go to Pauanui. I'll square the cabin booking myself. Give me your answer Tuesday. I almost laughed. I'll think about it. I did go to Pauanui in the end. I drove down on the Friday afternoon with Imogen and my mother and a bag of groceries that included, scandalously, a frozen pizza. We walked on the beach. Imogen found a piece of pumice the size of her fist and named it Kevin. My mother made me a cup of tea on the deck of the cabin on the Saturday morning and said, very quietly, I haven't seen you sit still like this since you were at uni. I think I forgot how. I know you did, love. I rang my middle sister from the deck. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, which is unusual for her. What does your gut say? She asked. My gut says I want to stay, but I'm worried that's just because I'm tired and the new place feels like more effort. Or, she said, your gut says stay, because you've spent 7 years building something and you'd like to actually run it. There's a difference between being too tired to leave and being clear-headed about what you're willing to fight for. How did you get so wise? I had 3 children in 3 years. You either get wise or you go under. On the Tuesday morning, I went to Jeffrey's office at 8, before Margaret was in. I told him I was accepting the role on 3 conditions. The first was that I had hiring authority for 2 associates, which we'd already discussed. The second was that the firm formally implement an internal mentoring and progression framework I'd been quietly drafting for 2 years, which made it impossible for any future partner to claim credit for work they hadn't substantively contributed to. The third was that Margaret remain in her current position, but that her annual review be conducted, going forward, with input from her direct reports rather than only from above. Jeffrey listened to all 3 without interrupting. When I finished, he stood up and walked around his desk and offered me his hand. Welcome to the partnership track, Harriet. That third condition is the one that tells me you're going to be very good at this. The firm-wide announcement went out at 11 that morning. By noon, my inbox had 240 unread emails, almost all of them congratulatory, and several of them, I noticed, from women in the firm I had barely spoken to in years, who wrote things like, I cannot tell you how much this means to us. Peter came past my desk looking slightly green and asked if it would be awkward if we kept working together. I told him it wouldn't be awkward at all, as long as he started actually reading the documentation I sent him. He laughed in a way that suggested he wasn't quite sure if I was joking. Margaret stayed in her office until nearly 4 o'clock. When she finally appeared at my desk, it was with a folder of strategy documents which she placed in front of me without quite meeting my eyes. Operational planning sits with you now. You'll need to take this to the partners on Thursday. Thank you. I'll prepare for it tonight. She turned to leave and then, against what I imagine was her better judgment, she stopped and turned back. Harriet, for what it's worth. I didn't recommend against your partnership because I thought you weren't capable. I recommended against it because I couldn't afford to lose you from my team. It was, I think, the most honest sentence she had ever spoken to me. Margaret, I said quietly, I know. And that's exactly the problem. A good leader develops her people, even when it costs her the comfort of having them stay where they are. If you'd promoted me 3 years ago, you'd still have had me as a partner. Now you have me as a colleague. That's a different relationship. She nodded, sharp and small, and walked away. We've worked civilly together every week since. She is, as I told Jeffrey, very good at clients. She just isn't, and never was, a person who should have been making decisions about other people's futures. Knowing the difference between those two things has been part of what I've had to learn in this new role. 3 months in, the changes are quiet, but they're real. I've hired 2 associates who'd been overlooked elsewhere, a brilliant junior named Tane, who'd been treated as a glorified paralegal at his last firm, despite having done most of the substantive work on 3 major matters, and a returning-to-practice mother named Sarah, who'd been told by every recruiter in Auckland that her 4-year break made her unhireable. They are, predictably, 2 of the strongest performers in my team. The Tairua Consortium expanded their retainer. Ranjamari sent me a handwritten card that I keep in my desk drawer and read on hard days. The internal progression framework has resulted in 2 early career promotions that would not have happened under the old system. Our staff retention numbers, which had been quietly dreadful for years, have begun to improve. I leave the office most days at 5:30. I am home in time for dinner, which I sometimes even cook. Imogen has stopped asking why I'm home. She has begun to assume it. My mother has started taking a Wednesday morning art class she'd been talking about for a decade. I have been to the Coromandel twice this year already. On a Friday afternoon a few weeks ago, I picked Imogen up early from school and took her for a hot chocolate at the place on Mount Eden Road that does the proper marshmallows. She stirred her drink for a long time and then said, in her serious voice, "Mum, you know how at work, when they didn't give you the big job, and then you stopped doing all their extra work, and then they got scared and gave you a better job?" "Yes," I said. "I remember that. That was clever. Because you didn't yell at them. You just stopped being the one fixing it." "That's about right, sweetheart." She took a long, thoughtful sip. "I think when I'm bigger, if someone treats me like that, I'll do that too. But I'll also tell them why. So they know." I had to look out the window at the buses for a moment. If you've ever sat in a meeting where someone said you were solid, reliable, adequate, and felt the small, private heartbreak of being told you were exactly enough to be useful and not quite enough to be promoted, I want you to take a few things from this story. The first is that being indispensable is not the same as being valued, and the people who taught you to confuse those 2 things did not have your best interests in mind. The second is that the quietest form of power is the willingness to stop. Stop staying late. Stop catching the mistakes of people who are paid more than you to make them. Stop performing competence as if it were gratitude. The work you do above and beyond your contract is a gift, and gifts that go unacknowledged for years stop being gifts and start being theft. You are allowed to close the tap. The third thing, and this is the one I most want you to hear, is that the goal was never revenge. The goal was to be properly seen, for what you have always been doing, and once you are seen, the most powerful thing you can do is build a system in which the next quietly competent person doesn't have to wait 7 years to be recognized. Don't just climb the ladder. Reach back down it. The corner office is nice. The view is exactly as good as you imagined. But what makes the view worth having is the people you bring up with you, and the ones you make sure never have to make themselves invisible to be promoted. Your worth was never in question. The only thing in question was whether you'd keep paying the price for other people's failure to notice it. The day you stop paying that price is the day everything starts to change. Not because you became someone new, but because you finally stopped pretending to be smaller than you are. If this story spoke to you, give it a like, follow the channel, and tell me in the comments, what was the moment you finally stopped doing the unseen work? I read every one. Your story might be the next one I tell.